Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. It's time to have a look at the aviation suggestions past the developers for June of 2024. Now, I did a specific video already on the MRA-4, the Nimrod, so we're not going to cover that again. And also, there is another vehicle that we won't be covering, which is the Kant Z511. If you want to see either of these vehicles, I'll leave links in the description so you can have a look at them. Just remember that I am on holiday, so sorry if I don't get to your messages or stuff like that, but I'll be back on the weekend so we can have a bit of fun. The first vehicle is a Sabre, and it is the North American F-86H. The F-86 Sabre is a single-seat, single-engine fighter jet aircraft, developed in the late 1940s and entered service in 1949. It was crucial in the Korean War, sharing the skies with the MiG-15 during the early 50s. The variant which we're actually looking at now, though, is the F-86H Sabre, which was nicknamed the Hog, or the Hogue Sabre. This was the most capable variant of this aircraft built by the United States. It began development in 1951 by North American Aviation as the Project NA-187, as a fighter-bomber version of the F-86 with nuclear strike capabilities, as well as the requirement for many other US aircraft at the time. 475 of these aircraft were manufactured. It served in the front line for a brief period of time, between 54 and 58, and then was phased out to Air National Guard duties, where it served until the early 1970s. And after that, the US Navy purchased some examples to use as an aggressor trainer and also target drones. Basically, the additional payload plan for this aircraft was to be handled by the bigger, more powerful General Electric J73 engine, which developed 8,920 pounds of force. The aircraft was overall visibly bigger than its predecessors, as its intake was increased and the fuselage was lengthened and widened, allowing for more internal fuel. The horizontal tail surfaces were made bigger and the vertical tail was taller. It had 4 underwing stations for various payloads and a more spacious cockpit. It had labs, or low-altitude bombing system, and the M1 TOS bombing computer fitted, and it had nuclear capabilities. As for the guns and the wings, it had many various configurations depending on the block number that you're looking at. You have the H1, which retained the 650 caliber machine guns and initially had the old slatted wing without the 6.3 extension. Later on, starting with the 15th aircraft, it was decided to fit the 6.3 wings. Then you have the H5, which was introduced with a new set of guns, 4 M39 cannons, previously tested in Korea as the T-160, and the ammunition supply was 150 rounds per gun. And then you also had the H10. This had the F40 wing, with extended wingtips and also slats, and eventually this wing was retrofitted onto all F-86Hs remaining in ANG service. So you can see that there is a lot of options for the F-86H. For Japan, we have the Fuji T-1A. In 1952, a partial ban on aircraft research in Japan was lifted, which made it possible for domestically designed aircraft to be produced in Japan. And by the spring of 1954, the Defense Agency of Japan had developed a plan to develop a training jet aircraft with potential to act as an emergency fighter. This plan resulted in the Fuji T-1. The T-1 was the first domestically designed jet aircraft produced in Japan since the Second World War, and Japan's first domestically designed swept-wing jet design. Design of a locally produced jet engine did not come soon enough, though, resulting in the first series of T-1s to be produced with the British Bristol Siddeley Orpheus Mark 805 turbojet engine, and was designated the T-1A. The first prototype T-1 made its first flight on the 19th of January 1958, with the first T-1s entering service in 1960. Once locally produced engines were available, production switched to the Ishikawajima Harima J3 IHI-3 turbojet engine, with these aircraft known as the T-1B. Some aircraft were later converted to use the Ishikawa-jima Harima J3 IHI-7 engine. These were called the T-1C. The Japanese engines were noticeably less powerful than the British engines. 46 T-1As and 20 T-1Bs were produced. The last T-1 was retired on the 3rd of March 2006 with the introduction of the T-4 trainer. The aircraft only ever acted in the training role and were usually fitted with two Sabre-type twin-fin drop tanks. However, they did have the capability of carrying 12.7mm gun pods, bombs, or AIM-9B sidewinders. They also had a 12.7mm Browning M53-2 machine gun mounted in the nose. The F-86 influence is clear, but the T-1 is very much a unique vehicle in every way. We also have the AFAMF XB-3 medium bomber. The XB-3 was an indigenously designed Chinese medium bomber, using parts from the Soviet Tupolev SB-3 bomber. The project began in 1942, when there was an urgent need for more bombers, as the SB and DB bombers given to the Chinese Air Force by the Soviets started to become obsolete against the fast-evolving Japanese Air Force, and to decrease reliance on foreign imports. Even though the XB-3 used parts from the Tupolev SB, mainly the engines, propellers, landing gear, and instrument panels, its fuselage and material consumption was different from the Soviet bomber. Instead of being all metal like the SB, the XB-3's fuselage and wing spars were made out of wood, and its skin was a special bamboo-based aircraft skin layer made by the Aeronautical Research Institute. 3 test flights were conducted, with the first 2 being successful. However, on the 3rd test flight, of the landing gears failed to extend, and this led to a crash landing, heavily damaging the plane and also the pilot. After this, further research was halted and the project was shut down. But according to one source, 3 more aircraft were made, with 1 being fully completed, and the project officially shut down in 1946. Even if this project was successful by 1944, the XB-3 would have been practically obsolete and wouldn't have been the frontline medium bomber it was intended to be. Fortunately for the ROCAF, B-25s filled in for the aging Tupolev SB fleet. For France, we have the CM-170 Fouga Magister. The French aircraft industry was severely impacted by the Second World War. However, some remnants of pre-war companies became the foundations upon which France would rebuild their former expertise. Among them, a small company that was mostly known for its gliders, Fouga C, forming a partnership with the brand new French jet engine company Turbomeca. They built their first civilian jet aircraft, the Cyclone, in 1948. It became the blueprint for trainer aircraft that would be called the Fouga Magister. After several years of development, the aircraft was finally ready in the mid-1950s. It interested the French Air Force, which selected it as the main trainer for its pilots. Quickly becoming a very popular aircraft, it was sold to many countries. NATO even took an interest in it, and the aircraft was produced outside of France, mainly in Germany, Finland, and also Israel, and it was the last of which used it extensively as a CAS aircraft during its wars. It also saw action in Africa. This means that there are many different variants of the CM-170 which had access to a bunch of different weapons. For example, you have the CM-170-1. This one had access to 2 Turbomeca Marbor 2A engines and was able to go at 715 kilometers an hour. It had access to 2 7.5mm machine guns and also access to bombs and rockets, as you may think. There was also the CM-170-2, which had access to 2 Turbomeca Marbore 6 engines, which also had access to the 2 internal 7.5mm and could also bring a 550 kilos of ordnance on 2 hardpoints, basically meaning it could carry more general ordnance than the other variant. For Israel, we have the A4F Skyhawk. This was developed as a direct successor to the A4E variant, presenting many practical improvements over the previous model. The first prototype of the A4F first flew on the 31st of August 1966, featuring the improved J52P8A engine, an ejection seat, nose wheel steering, wing spoilers, and new advanced avionics, which were installed in the avionics hump on the fuselage spine. 147 airframes in total were built by Douglas and entered service with the US Navy in time to participate in the Vietnam War. The A4F Skyhawk was not among the Skyhawk variants initially intended for sale to Israel. However, due to the circumstances that were presented during the 1973 Yom Kippur War, the IAF found itself implementing this new version into their ranks regardless, becoming the fourth single-seat Skyhawk version at that point to enter service with the IAF. During the Yom Kippur War, the IAF lost many Skyhawk aircraft, 52 to be exact. It was therefore established that as a part of the American airlift operations to supply Israel with armaments during the war, that the US Navy and Marines would supply the IAF with A4Es and F airframes to make up for the losses. The A4F Skyhawks were the latest to arrive, most of them arriving in the very final days of the war, basically between the 22nd and 23rd of October. The vast majority of them entering service with the 102nd Squadron, which suffered the most losses during the war. In total, the IAF received 16 of the new A4Fs. After the war was over, the IAF conducted a renumbering of the Skyhawks in service, based on the aircraft models. This resulted in all of the A4Fs being numbered with the 6XX template, making it fairly easy to distinguish them from other variants, despite the very subtle external differences. At this time, all A4F Skyhawks were also upgraded with the basic Israeli Skyhawk modifications, installing an extended fiberglass tailpipe to lower the heat signature, replacing the 20mm Colt cannons with 30mm DEFA 5.52 cannons with 150 rounds per gun, and also adding a drag chute installed under the tail. There's no evidence that suggests that the A4Fs were ever wired to carry Sheffield 2 missiles like the other Skyhawk variants. Much like some of the A4Es in service, as well as all of the A4Ns, all of the A4Fs received by the IAF had the ALQ-51A/100 ECM system installed under the nose. Additionally, unlike the models made specifically for Israel, the A4H and the N, which had a squared-off tip for the vertical stabilizer and the rudder, the A4F Skyhawks, much like the A4Es, retained the rounded shape. The A4F was also seen carrying some more advanced weapon types than those carried by the older H and E Skyhawk models, like the AIM-9D Sidewinders and the AGM-65 Mavericks. In the late part of their service, the A4Fs, as well as other older model Skyhawks, were re-engined to use the powerful J52P408A engine that was originally found on the A4N. The A4Fs continued service under the 102nd Squadron until the summer of 1978, when the IAF reopened the 147th Goring Ram Squadron. The 147th took part in all A4F Skyhawks, as well as some A4Es and A4Ns. This squadron was characterized by the yellow-painted rudders of the aircraft, which were then all applied to all A4Fs. The F of the IAF remained in service long enough to participate in the Lebanon War of 1982. They, along with the A4Es and Ns, were primarily used to attack PLO targets across Lebanon. Not long after, in 1985, due to the budgetary constraints, the 147th Squadron was closed, and the Fs were retired from service. Of the A4F Skyhawks, number 611 was chosen to be preserved and remains as a display aircraft to this day in the Israeli Air Force Museum in Hatzerim. As always, I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. I'd just like to thank GMG Smiley, CD Beans, Chieftain Mike, EMN3 Galaxy, Tulio Pontecorvo, Brendan Quinn, Carrion Crow, Gus Irenicus, Pyman, Wartinder, Teddy, Daniel Stanton, Martinez, B. Young, Ozzy Panzer, Alan Hacker, Liam Shear, Opium Prime, Lafouche, Sem, Aslan, Uncle Bean, and Derek R. for supporting the channel.